Welcome to another episode of SGS Recommends. Today we will talk about Maborosi from 1995, directed by Hirokazu Koreeda. So it's actually already our third Koreeda film. It might be the last one for quite a while, as we probably start repeating ourselves now that we've talked about Koreeda so much. But I have it in this set, and Altaz has the individual release that also has this cover. But yeah, I'll give a short intro as always. So it's Koreeda's feature debut film, even though it doesn't feel like a debut because it's such an amazing film. I think even on Letterboxd, the director Sean Baker, who uses Letterboxd, even said that how can the film look so amazing because it's a debut film. And we will get into the aesthetic later, but I already say this, that I think it might actually be his best looking film. It's just absolute perfection from the visual standpoint. But I'll give the plot synopsis now. So it's about this young woman and her young baby and also her husband. But then when the baby is like 3 months old, the husband dies, and it might have been a suicide, but we can't be completely certain. He gets hit by the train, but apparently he didn't try to save himself from the train, so it feels like it might have been a suicide. But then after that tragedy happens, we see her trying to live life and get over that huge tragedy and that huge loss, and then she ends up getting married again. But then the question here is that whether she can get over the losing her husband, her first husband, especially as it was such an unexpected tragedy. So in terms of the subject matter, it's quite different to the couple other films that we talked about, but at the same time, it still has that kind of family drama element. And in a way, the other two films that we talked about from Koreeda also tackled with loss, because of course with Still Walking, the family, one of their sons had died, and the whole family were trying to kind of deal with the loss of that son when he saved someone's life, I think in the ocean, like in that film. And then obviously, like Father, like Son, in a way is about kind of different type of loss as well, and it's about families and stuff. So in a way, all of these three films are connected, but this one is still quite different in some other ways. Yeah, and I think it might even be Koreeda's best film, but it's really hard to say because he makes so many great films. But yeah, now I will ask Altaz what he thought of Maborosi.
Yeah, it's a great film. It's absolutely amazing to watch that and think that that's that person's debut film. I mean, that's just the high level of execution and storytelling, and even like you said, the visuals, and even the thematic exploration and the sensitivity. And like you said, we've been watching some of his other films and discussing them. So to go further into the work and then his work and seeing the variations on theme, but how you can almost see a very clear thesis from the first film about the kind of things he's interested in exploring, and then from that route to see how that's expanded and how that's become more specific with the different films, yet those things give their own fruits and beauty is just it's incredible, and I'm looking forward to keep going through his filmography.
Yeah. So now we could talk about like what type of people would love this film. So I think, again, if you like slice of life films, if you like family dramas and dramas where not that much happens, but it's all about the kind of little details, it's about the characters and their experience, you would love this one. I think we, in the pre-talk, talked about Edward Yang a bit, and I think if you have watched Edward Yang's films, I think you would really like this one. It has a similar type of aesthetic and also the kind of deceptive simplicity that Edward Yang films have. Also, And if you like Koreeda's other films, obviously this is one of his must-see films, I think. And also if you like some of the older Japanese masters like Ozu and Naruse and people like that, you would probably like this one a lot. And even though it's about a very heavy subject, I think it's a fairly accessible film in many ways, but I guess it might be a bit triggering for people who have gone through these lots of loss in their lives. And I have gone through quite a bit of it, but I can still watch these films, but I understand if it might be too triggering for some people. So I guess that's something to mention. Yeah.
Absolutely. I agree with you there. It's for people, I would say, uh, if you're interested in like a complex exploration of pain, healing, resilience, with, I mean, there's hopefulness in there as well, because I feel that Koreeda is quite positive in that regard, that he does not really ever paint strong contrast between people in terms of good and bad. He very much stays in the lives in the gray, shows us the good and bad aspects of different things, different positions, different approaches, because grief is such a complex topic. So if you're interested in explorations of grief, this is a beautiful exploration of grief. But also, if you're interested in films that, while there's grief, there's always a, almost, I wouldn't say silver lining, but there's beauty painted in there that can almost inspire you and even work as a thread. Um, this is definitely for you. But more generally, all the things you said, if you like slow cinema, slow, patient explorations, if you really like trying to get into the mindset of a particular person going through a particular thing, and you would definitely enjoy this film. If you like films of humanity, films of empathy, yeah, definitely. That, and also once what you mentioned, seeing something that we might be going through, seeing someone from a different place in a different world with different, maybe sometimes norms or cultures, going through that same thing can give you a perspective. So that would also interest people like that to see this film.
Yeah, the Japanese humanist filmmakers like Koreeda are really good at exploring themes like this. Yeah, it's really hard to find films from many other countries that tackle these types of themes as well and as universally as the Japanese filmmakers do. But now we could get into the aesthetic and the spoilers, although again it's another type of film that the spoilers don't matter that much, in my opinion. But again, people are obsessed about avoiding spoilers, so if you want that, don't watch any more of the discussion. Yeah. But anyway, so the aesthetic, I think we've talked about the Koreeda aesthetic a lot, but I think here it's a bit even more special than in the other two films that we have talked about. It has those like utterly perfect still shots where he can just like shoot a building and it just looks absolutely stunning. Like the angle is in like perfect place and everything looks perfect. And one kind of very amazing thing about the aesthetic here is that how it kind of creates this feeling of loss. Like the space is kind of feels so empty in a way that even just from the visuals you get the sense of loss and emptiness and that something is missing. Like when we see these shots from of the rooms and there is lots of this empty space and maybe table in the front of the shot, it just creates this kind of melancholic, very sad place. And of course, there are also shots of like a train and then the ocean and stuff like that, and that kind of adds to the contemplative nature of the film as well. So I think the aesthetic plays a really big role in this film.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's just this, I mean, just even how the film opens up. So we get this fade into light. So from black into light is how it opens, and then there's this really beautiful initial sequence um, of Yumiko as a girl, and her early trauma with her grandmother leaving the house, and she's unable to stop her grandmother, and her grandmother not returning. So, like you said, that the sequence, that there's a feeling in the way it's shot as you're bringing it into the world, that's both gives you an appreciation of the place, but the perspective. So like you said, the aesthetic is always so cleverly done in Koreeda films, where it's like you're able to put in the subjective into the objective reality. So we're in this place, but the feelings, so how do you create feeling out of what is just images, is a really incredible thing to see. And like you said, and it very much harks back to like Ozu, when we were talking about Autumn Afternoon, where I was like, oh, the shot opens up with a factory, and the factory kind of looks sad. How do you make a factory look sad? And it's like there's that all over this film, like you said, from the interiors, from the lighting, from the camera, even the still camera work, to really give that feeling of loss, of grief, of internal struggle relating to the tragic events that Yumiko has experienced in her life. So yeah, really amazing aesthetic. And then we also get into the cinematography when we actually go into where she moves, where it's like by the ocean and it's a small town. So the contrast of the Osaka, and then the ocean, and a more rural community, a fisherman's community. Just everything's just captured so beautifully.
Yeah, and also, like you said in the beginning, that in Koreeda films there is always hope and hopefulness, and I think this film really paints the human condition in its totality, not just the aspect of loss and sadness, but also moments of hope and happiness. Like there's this scene when the family is eating watermelons, for example, and that's like a really beautiful, very humane, small
Mm.
scene, and how that is shot. It gives you hope in these times of loss. But then, as the film progresses, we see how hard and painful it can be to get over a loss. So the sadness comes back, even though there are these moments of hope and happiness. And the thing that really adds to the loss, like I think I mentioned in the beginning, is that because she doesn't know whether her husband like killed himself or whether he just died accidentally, and you will never know that for certain, so that will always haunt you. And of course, I guess there is maybe a bit of this idea that you will never get over your first love, that young love that was maybe more passionate than love when you get older, and that really adds to the pain as well. Yeah.
Yeah, so much there that you're saying. First one, when you're talking about, we were discussing the hopefulness, and it's interesting because how you choose films that are related and then mirror images. So I think when you picked Kotoko and Maborosi, I almost felt like those were explorations that have some things that might be in parallel. So here we see a positive side to an intrusiveness in society. So she Yumiko clearly lives in a society where people are very much aware of one another because there isn't a lot of space. Uh, right? I mean, I watched that classic show Shogun, and there was something really interesting in there that uh, one of the characters says, which is that, oh, in Japan we don't have a lot of like space because we are all meant to kind of live in close proximity to one another, and share in so many things. So we almost have to retreat deep into ourselves to get personal space, and that might be one of the reasons, like you said, that these explorations are especially poignant coming out of Japanese cinema versus any other cinema. Uh, but the fact that she's here, there's a positive to the intrusiveness. Her intrusive neighbor, who helps set her up with another marriage, that intrusiveness has a positivity to it. Whereas when you look at Kotoko, that intrusiveness was almost negative and voyeuristic. Like people were just almost, or maybe in her perspective, they were threatening because they were constantly watching her and what's going on and why are you making this noise and why are you acting this way. So the two sides of it. So here we see the Koreeda's hopefulness that even these people around that are prying into your life, these kind of, sometimes we can see them when we're younger as annoying older people. Why are you doing this? Oh, you should find somebody. Or I found someone for you. Or let me introduce someone. Oh, you shouldn't be alone. That kind of intrusiveness can be very negative, but in this film, it's something positive. People are well-meaning, so that's a source of light in this Koreeda film and in Koreeda films in general. Sometimes there's light in behaviors that we usually would associate with being negative sometimes.
Yeah, and often those people that we can see as intrusive but well-meaning, like they can say some like harsh truths to us that might feel like bad at the time, but they might be right. Like there's this one older woman who says to her that maybe it was best that your child was only 3 months old, that when your husband died, because then again the baby doesn't remember his father. So that's a good thing in a way, that they won't be missing the father in that way because the baby was so young when he died. But there's always this kind of big contrast here between the like losing someone and the happiness, because when we see the guy who kills himself in the early in the movie, he seems so happy, like such a happy person and like a funny person and a great guy, but then he just suddenly decides to kill himself. So it kind of feels like maybe everything is an illusion in a way, that this happiness and hopefulness is just an illusion, but there is always these bad things under the surface, and these people just put on a happy face in their life, but then they are really sad in reality.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the beauty of Koreeda, where he helps the audience live in a space that's right between the subjective and the objective. So that hopefulness of that lady, because I won't say she's objective completely, because she's subjective in a sense too. But what I'm saying is she's kind of reflecting what you said in that example, a larger picture, and saying, yeah, I mean, there's this tragedy, but then there are certain good things. Like the tragedy could have been worse, and growing up you always got that, well, it could have been worse, it could have been worse. And while you're also seeing the subjective, where it's that we give this advice and it may be right from a perspective, but it doesn't help to solve the thing for Yumiko herself. In fact, it can exacerbate some of her pain, because someone that you loved, you're going to get a conflict in your mind that, I loved someone so much, how could it be that the good thing in my life was that to introduce this person, then to take them away, and then so I can have this better life, uh, or what might seem like a better life, or someone's telling you is a better life. So it is a really incredible exploration to be able to capture that. And someone like you said, like anyone who's gone through grief and pain, which I think majority of the world have to a certain extent, it's such a perspective that we don't often get, and it's such a, in a way, perspective building and healing, because it gives a conversation piece for both sides. The people who are giving the advice and giving that perspective versus the person who's individually going through it. It shows the exact conflict of where these two things meet and how they can be both right, and there's no real wrong. And that's what I really like about Koreeda's films, is that he's not interested in what's wrong, who's wrong. He's very interested in there is no wrong, and what we really need is greater understanding of what that person's trying to achieve versus what that person is going through. Um, that. And then in this film, there's a nice through line, like you said, of grief, because it starts with the grandmother, the earliest grief. I couldn't stop my grandmother. She went off and she never came back. Now, the positivity could be that the grandmother herself did not want to die in this surrounding. She wanted freedom to die in her own way. And maybe that's mirrored in, that friend she had growing up is the only one she could share that original grief with, to the point where she almost said that you're the reincarnation of my grandmother. Like, my grandmother's spirit is in you now. So it's almost like an attached to the original grief. So like you're saying, you never get off the original love, but maybe you never get over the original major grief in your life. Uh, and then losing him is losing connection to that original grief. So there's like this double grief. She's grieving loss of a friend. She's grieving connection with the original loss. Um, and in a way, she's grieving what could have been, but now she's grieving the change. And now she's also grieving that she gets to go on with her life. It's so complex and so beautifully woven, uh, this whole exploration.
And I think we can add a societal layer to all the kind of emotional and psychological things that you were just mentioning, because of course suicide, for example, is a topic that we kind of associate with Japan. Again, with World War II, there were the suicide bomber like kamikaze thing, and then there's the double idea of double suicide. Then there are the suicide forests. So there is lots of suicide-related things about Japanese culture, and sometimes it's even like glorified. Of course, there's the idea of harakiri and seppuku, and things like that. And then again, this guy who did suicide, he had a family. He had kind of in a way, a perfect life, enough money to survive, a child, everything was looking up, but then he still decided to commit suicide. So maybe that's also kind of a commentary how the traditional way of living a Japanese life, maybe it isn't the pathway to happiness when you are in this, again, just living family life, doing the things that you're supposed to do and lacking any individuality that can cause depression. And then you maybe want to escape that kind of social norm and that convention and kill yourself. And then, of course, there are these other societal things here, like, again, arranged marriage. Obviously, that was something that Ozu always discussed. And here we see that, again, maybe like traditionally in Japan, the arranged marriage is something that leads you to a good life. But here we see that you cannot escape the loss and these old feelings by going to another marriage and getting back to a normal life. You will have those strong emotions even after that. So there is this commentary about the Japanese view on marriage and then on suicide. And then with the suicide, there is this battle of individuality and the collective. Yeah, you are confined to social norms, which might not like let you be an individual, and because of that, you might want to kill yourself. So there are lots of these societal layers in this film, in addition to the psychological and emotional layers.
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. And near the end, where I believe it's the father, so Tamio, the one, her new husband, her father, and they're like sitting there. I think it's him who says it, or Tamio says it to her. And relays this because she can't make sense of the suicide, as we've been discussing. It gives this example of the father is a fisherman, or I don't know, just going out to sea and being out there and then on the ocean and then seeing a light and being drawn towards it. And now here's when we really see that there's a whole spiritual layer to what's going on in Koreeda's films and explorations, because you're thinking about oblivion, a sense of oblivion, where you see the power of nature, you see a greater reality. So there's the nature and then human society, and we construct a reality, like you said. So you used the word illusion earlier, and I think illusion is definitely pervades the whole film. Human society is a form of illusion as well, and there's another greater reality, and every human being might feel at a certain point this pull towards the greater reality. And the greater reality, if you look at spirituality in terms of like Buddhism and Eastern philosophy, uh, it is to leave the cycle of the human illusion and go into that oblivion and experience some kind of release. And some people feel that pull greater than others. And like you said, there's this controversial thing here, that in this particular society, suicide has all these different, you know, uh, expressions, and it is pervaded in the society through history. Sometimes, like you said, it's based on honor. Sometimes it's realizing that there's no real escape, and there's almost like a trap to humanity. And sometimes the lover suicide, the double suicide. So it's a very loaded thing. And in this, it's a more or less stigma. It's like the way to help her realize it is maybe he didn't kill himself. At least we're still assuming he killed himself. We don't know for sure. But maybe it wasn't because he was unhappy. I think maybe one of the questions she naturally would have is, was it me? Did I make him unhappy? Did I do something wrong? And, like you're saying, sometimes these things aren't enough. And the person's either unhappy, which is what we see in Western. The only reason you do suicide is you're just unhappy and it can be solved. Versus a more spiritual, like he's seeking some kind of oblivion. Just like the grandmother. She just wanted to go. She just felt like it's her time. Like Ballad of Narayama. It's like, that's it. This is my time. And, I just want to go. So it creates this more greater complexity, which then further amplifies the grief, because you can understand from her perspective, how is she supposed to make sense of it? Even with this new information, maybe you're seeking some kind of oblivion. It doesn't fully resolve anything, like you said. It's just something you have to live with. The grief doesn't go away. It's a ache in your bones you'll always have for the rest of your life.
Yeah, I liked what you said in the beginning about like searching for the greater reality and stuff, because that's a maybe big flaw in humans as a species, that we are never satisfied with what we have. We always look past our capabilities. We have too much ambition. We need something divine, and that's why people want religion, because it gives you something that's outside of our world, something bigger, something more interesting. But then when you realize that, yeah, the human life isn't that you should be happy with smaller things that can create this depression and maybe make you want to kill yourself. It's really weird to talk about this, as I mentioned to you in the email that I watched this anime called Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, but it's basically that the whole theme of that show is this, that people want to be like gods and they want to like be something more, even though in the end the ultimate goal should be that we are empathetic and compassionate people and try to be good people and actually be satisfied with what we have and not look past that. But But that's just something as we humans just are like that. That we always think that the grass is greener, whether it's a imaginary grass or a real grass somewhere. But yeah,
That's a very good point, and it's very relevant. You can see it in the film. It made me think about the fisherman lady who doesn't have family, lives on her own, goes out fishing, and they say she gets lost at one point, and that starts bringing her grief back. Oh, about her grandmother not coming back, and I could have stopped this lady as well. And this lady comes back perfectly fine, and they said she'll be back. She's indestructible. But maybe her indestructibleness relates to what you're saying, that she is not trying to be anything greater. She is just living life, and she has an interest in continuing to live life. She doesn't have family. So all these things that are supposed to give you meaning. Okay, some career, successful career. Okay, you have marriage. Oh, you have kids. Oh, you have love, or you have all these things. She doesn't visibly have any of that, but she is actually indestructible. And someone who has that is vulnerable. And so you're right that that's another very interesting theme that's really there, and which makes sense because if you have a society that's very driven and it's very about going forward and succeeding and progress, and we see that, we saw it in Like Father Like Son, we saw it in Still Walking. There's these things are being brought in terms of the challenges of the society, and then, like you said, the dissatisfaction, it creates the emptiness, and then the also, like you said, the kind of human megalomania to want to transcend that, to become something bigger, to be part of something larger. And it's like it's it can almost be a sickness, uh and it's contrasted nicely with the nature, because they're by the ocean, and where she can't even sleep, the ocean is so loud, and she says, oh, the ocean is so powerful. And the ocean, in a sense, is not trying to be anything. The ocean just is. And so is that lady. She just is. There's the ocean. I need to go get crabs, uh, to get food. There's a communalness. There's a peace and tranquility in the communalness. So that kind of breaking out of that competitive structure. I see that theme in the Koreeda films, and it's very relevant what you're saying, I believe.
and in the sense, again, the woman and her dead husband are kind of like mirrors to each other. They are both looking at something that they cannot reach, something unknown, because the woman is trying to find out why he killed himself, but obviously you can never find that out because he's already dead. And then the husband tried to find something out of human life that wasn't possible, something greater. So both of them are searching for something that they cannot reach and find. So in that way, they're actually very similar, but in different ways. And of course, I think this also has that type of family commentary that even if you are married to someone, even if you think you know someone really well, that person might actually be completely different than your perception of them. You thought that, yeah, I love my husband, I love him as a person, but then you don't know that he wants to kill himself and that he isn't happy. And that kind of adds the conversation about the individuality and collectivism, because this like really shows that we are really individuals and we can never truly understand another individual because they are their own individual and they have their own mind and their own personalities. So there's this big conversation about individuality in many different levels in this film, I think.
Yeah, there really is. There really is. And you're right, the one-sidedness, you see it in the beginning. If she continually sees him as the reincarnation of her grandmother, in a way, it's we're always looking at someone and finding meaning in them and wanting to be what is meaningful to us, whether versus really getting to know a person. And I think there is that contrast in the relationship, two relationships, because like you said, you would expect, oh, she's going to get her marriage arranged and all that, or she's being introduced and then she's going to go off to this place that she's going to be miserable, but she actually finds a very uh in a way good living situation, and a good relationship, because it's a, in a way, is much more mature relationship, because her husband, her new husband, is really trying to get her to know her as she is, and she is just getting to know him as she is. And then you go back to her previous relationship, and that's not really what it was. It's from childhood, we've grown together, we definitely know each other. So it's like you said, these are things that really hark on to our own egoism, that the ultimate thing is to break the ego. If you really want good relationships, if you really want, in some ways, a healthier life, you need to break the ego and you need to submit. And I guess that's why the presence of nature again is there, because nature is one of those things can break the ego. It can say, look at the power of nature, like what are you in relation to that? So really kind of take yourself apart and have that humility, and then go with the flows of life, because you can't really control life. You can't really, you don't make people into who they are their own people, and all those kinds of things.
And we kind of see her becoming like her dead husband when she gets married again, because on the surface, that life looks like really nice. You have a family, kids, and food and a house, but then she's so unhappy and still thinking about the past and the unknown. So that's very similar to what her dead husband was like as well. That looking at past the family life and wanting something greater. So they, like I said
Mm.
earlier, they are very much like kind of mirror images to each other. That again, the woman becomes like her dead husband later on. So that's very interesting, and that wasn't something I was thinking about when I was watching the film, but now I'm just thinking about it when we are
Hmm.
discussing the film.
Yeah, it's a very sensitive film from someone that you can really understand if you've gone to grief yourself or trauma. That here's someone who understands, because even the whole sequence where she initially breaks out of her grief and she's very much getting into her new life and it's opening up, there's a period where she returns back to the scene of the grief. And after that, she enters into a new period of low. And, as we were discussing, like that can happen because you're ready to move forward in your life. And then you somehow, as a human being, there's something pulls you back to the source of the grief. And it's almost like you reopen the wound and you start feeling it all over again. And then you get pulled into the vortex of that grief. And then you start forgetting where you are, and you become disoriented, you get lost, you and it's like, and what is just the most profound, beautiful, one of the most beautiful sequences I've seen is that funeral procession thing, starting with when she's sitting there at that bus stop, and she's just sitting in there by herself, and the bus comes and leaves, and you think she's going to get on the bus, but then she's still sitting there, and then she sees that funeral procession and she follows that funeral procession. It is such a profound, beautiful sequence. Is one of the most amazing sequences I've ever seen. Uh, and it reflects all that, her need to keep grieving, her need to have a visible symbol of her grief, people to grieve with her, because one thing we forget is she kind of grieved alone, right? She alone grieved for him, no one else is grieving with her. It's a loss she gets to experience all by herself, and that need to have communal grief, and It's a really really profound film.
And as we are discussing this film, I feel like it might actually be quite a bit deeper than the other two Koreeda films that we have talked about. I think this is just on a whole nother level. Those films are like Father I'm Still Walking, they're a bit more specific, but this film Maborosi has such kind of wide-ranging
Mm,
themes about the human condition that you could put it on the list of those kind of human condition films that I talk about on my channel that really
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
kind of tell you so much about the human condition and what it means to be a human and what is the human experience. So yeah, it's just such a beautiful film, and my appreciation for it keeps on growing the more we talk about
Yeah,
it. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely agree with you. I would put that on the list of, as we've discussed before, and you've talked about on your channel as well. A list of films like, if you could show someone, even someone young, and start telling them about life, this is one of them you'd put on there. Because no matter what kind of grief you have, whether the loss is death, whether the loss is loss of love and all that, I we all experience it. Like, I lost, you know a grandparent when I was very young, and it still stays with me. And so this film really shows that how it pervades in ways that you don't even understand. But like you said, it's much more amorphous, because grief is such an amorphous cloud. It's not, everyone experiences grief differently, everyone behaves differently to it, everyone responds differently to it, and the way it impacts your life and kind of continues in your life is very much under the surface, and you don't fully recognize it. And how it can hold you back, you don't recognize it. And this film does a great job of doing that without judging her for the pain she's going through. And that's because even her new husband shows her incredible empathy, because he never judges her grief. And then she learns that he has had a loss of his own. Uh, and just, but he seems differently. Like, how did you just simply just get over this? So it's like you said, it's just a very special film in that regard. And for, yeah, it's one that you can really journey with.
And even beyond loss and grief, it just really shows you that you cannot escape your past. You can learn to live with it, but it will always affect how you live your
Yeah.
life, and that trauma will always be there, whether it's there unconsciously or consciously, or whether it's small or big. You cannot fully
Mm.
escape that, and that past just molds us and keeps molding us as we grow older. And that's the case with all of us. That's what is universal about the human experience.
Yeah, and it shows the projection of grief too, because there's that wonderful scene, like you said, when that lady says to her, maybe it's best, your baby was 3 months old. He doesn't remember a thing about his father passing away. And right in that second, you see him picking out a green bike, you know, and obviously, initially, there was a bike that her previous husband had stolen. They painted it green. And immediately, even as at the audience, you're like, oh, does that mean he remembers because he picked a green bike? But it shows our own fallacies too, our need to jump to conclusions. Maybe, seeing coincidence as having meaning, like you're saying, and that connects back to everything your points you're making about our need to be something greater, and there being something beyond us, beyond, and then we keep searching for it, and and even though it actually pulls us away from life, this is a very small detail that Coreda puts in, but then really amplifies the narrative, because it starts creating these questions of, is she just projecting her grief? Just because she saw her child pick a green bike does not mean he remembers his father and is grieving his father. He just picked a green bike. He could just like green bikes. And then, in like father or like son, when we're talking about nature versus nurture, your love for green could be something even biological, that's in your blood, possibly. Who knows? No one knows why he picked that green bike, but from that lens, you easily can make it that, oh, he's picked a green bike because he's grieving or he's missing his father. And so the surrogate family thing, that like father, like son, is in there too, because his father is now not his biological father, and the kid seems to be perfectly okay.
Yeah, that's another human flaw that we feel like we need to give more meaning to things like coincidences, and that we need to try to explain the unexplainable even if we cannot do that, and then that prevents us from moving on because we try to explain something that just cannot be explained. And even when science develops and develops, there are still so many things that we don't know about and we'll probably never know about, but humans just have that ambition that we need to explain it all, but then we always create this disappointment for ourselves when we cannot do that.
Exactly. And we can't explain grief, and we can't explain loss, and we can't explain the reasons for the loss in this case, and in many cases. They just happen. It's like part of living. And that's what that old lady, as the fisherman, she's the fisher person, this is what she represents, that she's okay with life as is. And that whole community is more okay with life as is. Whereas when you come from the city, you're less okay with life as it is, because you have somehow been given the illusion that you can transcend life, you can control life, you can change, you can explain everything away. And maybe you just can't. There's no explanation.
And there's certain beauty about loss and grief as well, because that shows us that we as human beings are capable of love and empathy and caring about somebody. So obviously that's very beautiful, even though it hurts, but it shows that we are beautiful beings in a way, even though with all of these flaws. But at least we have the capacity to care about others and feel for others, and if we could just increase that capacity, we could make the world a better place. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%.
But yeah, I think we can start wrapping this conversation up. I think we have now really dissected who Koreda is as a filmmaker, now that we have done 3 of his films that are all a bit different from each other. And we might return to Koreda at some point, but we'll see, as we have now already talked about many of his films and it's hard to find things to add, but I'm sure that obviously, if we don't return to him in the podcast, we will obviously both keep watching his films, as we are both fans, and he's one of my top 20 directors, and I feel like he's probably gonna become one of Altaz's favorites, as well as he has liked all of these 3 films, and he still has many other great ones to watch. But yeah, we might return to him next year, but we'll see how it goes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's become my wife's favorite filmmaker too. She enjoys all his films that we watched so far. So yeah.
And we will certainly return to these types of films again, as we both happen to really like this type of cinema. So.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
the number one fan of our podcast, Tony, likes this type of cinema a lot too, even though now he's been in the mood for musicals and stuff, but he loves this type of stuff. And I think when the dark autumn comes, maybe he will get into the mood for this type of stuff again.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
But yeah, in the next episode, one more thing is that, I mentioned this last time, that again, we don't have any Japanese cinema schedule for the rest of the year. We have some in December, but we will have a long break from Japanese cinema, which is a bit sad, but there are lots of other great films that we will talk about. And then in the end of the year, and of course next year, we will talk about lots of Japanese films again. And of course, I will probably make some solo content about Japanese cinema as well. So look out for that. But in the next episode, we will talk about Bellatar's Werkmeister harmonies, so that will be very interesting as always to talk about something so difficult. But yeah. Thanks for watching this episode. Don't drink Coke at all. Sayonara and arigato gozaimashita.